I'm going to tell you about first is called Kirtan Kriya Yoga. Yoga is not only physical postures. Yoga can also be mental exercises. You could think about it as kind of mental stretches that you do to achieve more peace of mind. And so one form of guided imagery, or a yogic meditation type of practice involving imagery, was studied by a mentor of mine at UCLA. His name is Dr. Helen Lavretsky. And what she did was to provide caregivers with a CD, and the whole process took them about 15 to 20 minutes. And they would do this repetitive focusing exercise using multiple senses. So verbal sense, repeating a set of syllables, an imaginative sense of light coming down upon them and into their body, and a musical kind of sound sense as well. There's a kind of tune to it. And I'm going to take you through a version of this. But first I'd like to tell you a little bit more about what Dr. Lavretsky found in a few different studies. So the first study was with 49 dementia caregivers, and she randomly assigned them to either receive a CD in which they listened to relaxing music, which is a wonderful thing to do. We all enjoy listening to pleasurable music, relaxing music. You can think about for yourself what that does for you, what the kinds of emotional effects of that are. So these caregivers either receive that relaxation CD to listen to, or they practice this Kirtan Kriya form of guided imagery. And Dr. Lavretsky's results favored Kirtan Kriya in a number of different ways. Depression symptoms improved, caregivers' cognitive scores improved. So one thing that I didn't mention about caregiving is that many caregivers experience decreases in attention, decreases in focus, and in memory that often are reversible. They don't necessarily mean that the caregiver is getting demented, but they can be a side effect of stress or anxiety or even depression as the caregiver is experiencing. And so Dr. Lavretsky found that doing this practice resulted in cognitive improvements that favored the Kirtan Kriya versus the relaxation. And finally, and very interestingly, telomerase activity was studied within the peripheral blood cells of caregivers going through the intervention. So telomerase is the enzyme that builds up the end plates on your DNA molecules. The length of telomeres, which are these end caps here in green, is associated with how healthy the cell is, how long it will live, how long that cell will survive. And as these end plates shorten and shorten, then the cell is at higher risk of dying. And shorter telomeres overall are associated with the aging process. There are even scores that people have developed that take into account the length of telomeres along with other genetic markers to predict how old a person actually is. And telomerase is the enzyme that builds up telomere length, that repairs telomeres when they become damaged. And so this study gives us a hint that this kind of repetitive guided imagery practice may be useful in helping with maintaining the stability of telomeres. So getting down to the cellular level there with this psychological practice. A very exciting result. In the second study, it was actually not with caregivers, but I had to include it anyway. It was with people who self-reported that they had cognitive impairment and they were worried about whether they were becoming demented or not. And in this study, they did Kirtan Kriya versus a standard memory enhancement training. So brain games you could say. And interestingly, they found that both improved memory, but the yoga also improved certain cognitive faculties related to how we plan and organize behavior, executive function, more so than did the memory training exercises, which were more geared to giving people tips on how to remember things. And it also improved depression more. So we see these multiple different effects from this stress-reducing exercise that uses multiple cognitive faculties, right? The music, the sound. Oh, I didn't mention there's also a finger tapping component of it, which we'll do together, imagining that light and just allowing oneself to resonate within that experience. For a few minutes, the caregiver's experienced is really quite healing. And it showed in multiple different aspects. Now, everything has its culture. And I wanted to share with you where Kirtan Kriya comes from, because obviously it's not an English language word. It's from a yogic tradition that's called Kundalini Yoga. This was brought to the United States by Yogi Bhajan back in the 1960s, 1970s. And within this tradition, the syllables that are repeated of Kirtan Kriya, or are satanama, have their own meaning. Okay, so it's a practice that's deeply embedded within the spiritual tradition of Kundalini Yoga. I think it's important to know that, because some people feel more comfortable with how these kinds of spiritual practices translate out into clinical settings or into their own practices than do others. And so one of the giants here at Harvard Medical School who studied the relaxation response was a man named Herbert Benson. And one of the things that Dr. Benson did was he took some of the spiritual practices from transcendental meditation and applied them into the clinic, first at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, where I worked with him actually even before I became a medical student. And then he shifted them over here to the Massachusetts General Hospital, and they're here and available via the Benson Henry Institute. But what he did was he took some of these practices from transcendental meditation, and instead of having people use a TM mantra or a set of syllables, he had them pick something that was important to them. And in that way, he translated this immensely powerful practice that for some was culturally limited and made it more accessible to a broader audience. And so in that spirit, I thought that tonight, as the first of two different little exercises we'll do, we could do a variation of the Satanama practice with a set of syllables that's somewhat similar in sound, loving water, and we could experience a little bit of this ourselves. So thought we could do this exercise for about 3 minutes or so. And then if you like it, you can do it yourself on your own, using Satanama, loving water, whatever you choose for yourself. It doesn't really matter. It's not the syllables itself that matters. It's the engagement of these cognitive circuits and that experience of healing as it is for you. There are also online resources that you can use if you want further guidance with this kind of practice. So what I would like you to do is to just take your hand for a moment, and you'll be using your thumb to touch each of your fingers, each of your 4 fingers in succession, as you repeat each one of these syllables of loving water. And there's a little tune to it as well. So it's loving water, loving water. And if you feel comfortable, you can say that out loud. If you don't feel comfortable, you can just be with it in silence. With each syllable, you tap your finger in sequence, and you can also imagine that light shining down upon you, entering you as if you were, for example, at this lovely beach, which perhaps was in Los Angeles or perhaps was here in Boston somewhere. All right, so you can follow along, and what you'll notice is that as we go through it, so we'll repeat it out loud about 10 times, and then it'll become softer and softer, and then ultimately just repeat it in your head. You don't have to repeat it out loud at all, and that's a part of the practice it moves from the outside to the inside imagery. All right, so loving water, loving water, loving water, loving water. And return your attention to your breathing. When you're ready, you can open your eyes if they're not already open, and bring your attention back